What was your scariest a second later and I well died moment? Outside my college dorm my freshman year there was this stoop that was half under the building, half out from under it. The building was 18 stories tall. So I'm sitting out there sitting on the steps, not under the building, and I get up for no real reason and walk under the building. As soon as I get under the building, a huge sheet of glass falls right where I was sitting. Some idiots were messing around on the 11th floor and knocked a 10x9 window pane out of its mooring. I was walking into a Miller's Outpost, tells you the time period, and the M from the sign above the store fell down and hit me on the shoulder. It was a big glass sign. One moment sooner and it hits my head. Because it drew blood, the store offered to give me any item I wanted, so I wouldn't sue. I chose an awful red cardigan. I was 16 and dumb. My friend and I were taking an elevator down to the cafeteria in our dorm in college. For some reason, we were arguing about something when the doors opened, so we hung back for a second. Then the elevator dropped 2 floors with the doors up. I still hate getting in out of elevators, and I do a weird running start every time. Edit. Happened in Canada. Was an old building elevator. 1950s. Second edit. We were in the elevator when it dropped. More terrified of the getting sliced in half aspect than the drop. I passed out at work and came around in the hospital. They diagnosed a bleed on the brain and eventually decided to drill a hole in my skull to drain the fluid. Just as they were about to put me under, the phone rang. It was the head of neurology. I actually had a burst aneurysm. According to my doctor, I would have probably been dead seconds after they started the surgery. I cannot confirm whether this would have been death, however it would have changed my and my parents' life like death. I was about 6 or 7, and I went along with my mum to go train the new puppy we had. The training ground was quite far away from home, and I remember that it was a big field surrounded by a forest and a motorway on the side of it. I was told to stay in the car and play on my Gamma Boy, back when they were a thing lol. After an hour or so I got bored, and I went to have a look at where my mum was with our puppy. The car park was a little while from the training ground, but I decided to walk towards her anyway. In the meantime an older man, 30-ish, starts talking to me, and the naive little boy I talked back, regardless of all the times my mum told me to not talk to strangers. He convinced me I was going the wrong way and told me he would take me to my mum and puppy house. We ended up by the motorway side and we were about to walk down the bank to the side of the motorway where his car was parked. As I'm about to disappear down the bank I hear the loudest scream of my name from my mum. I look back and feel the grip of the man tighten on my hand, but I was just in time to get my hand out of his grip and run towards my mother. My mum runs past me to see where this guy is, but he had just got into his car and drove off. To this day I still imagine about the what if scenario and how close I was to being kidnapped and potentially killed. When I was in junior high I was carpooling with another kid and her mom. For a reason I can't fathom she decided to race a transit train hoping to get across the tracks before the train stopped traffic. She gunned the car. I was in the backseat screaming no. She hit the train. Because I was in the backseat I was injured the least. I had a pointy piece of metal pierce through my jeans and flesh until it hit bone. Had she been a second faster the train would have hit us broadside and killed us all. Edit to answer the questions. This was 1980. She was not charged or sued. It was labeled an accident. She and her daughter suffered broken bones, lacerations, and concussions. Because of the parental acrimony I couldn't be friends with the girl anymore. The family moved away before the end of the school year. I know at the time her mum was still not working. I'm not sure if she ever went back to work. Clearly she had or had developed some kind of mental or emotional problem which the accident probably made worse. I wondered if she was an alcoholic who began day drinking, but I never mentioned my suspicion to anyone. I needed crutches for a few months. My story is a second earlier, and I would have died. Basically I got T-boned by a van while riding my bicycle. Missed me by a couple inches, destroyed the back of the bike, and threw me into traffic. When I was in middle school I called my mom on my cell during lunch because my head hurt so badly I couldn't move. She was one on speed dial. Well, the nurse came and brought me to the office for a checkup and some pain pills while I waited for my mom. We didn't live close. Nurse said no fever and to take me home and put me to bed. My mom watched me get into the truck and decided that maybe we should go to the hospital to be safe. By the time we reached the hospital, it was further than our home. My temp was at 104 and I was incapacitated. I had meningitis. If we went home and she put me to bed like the nurse suggested, I never would have woken up. Edit for detail. For those who keep asking, speculating it was viral meningitis, the less severe form, but it progressed very quickly. I had no headache when I arrived at school. By lunchtime I couldn't move on my own, and I couldn't see because light was too bright. The nurse came to get me, and I didn't have a fever. After waiting for my mom 10 minutes and the 20-minute drive to the hospital and 10-minute wait at the hospital, it was at 104. Yes, we told the nurse after, but there was only some of the symptoms. When I left school, she never gave me or my mother advice again, just told symptoms and gave pain meds. A couple months ago I was in a head-on collision with some dude on crack driving down the wrong side of the road with his headlights out. I was going probably around 50 before I saw him. Speed limit was 55, so that's my best guess. Saw him with a second or two of reaction time. Managed to brake hard and swerve over, only bad enough to total my car, but I still walked away with nothing more than a sore neck. If I hadn't seen the dude, I don't doubt that I cold died or been seriously injured. About 30 years ago my family and I were driving up to Jasper, Alberta in the winter. There was a slow car in front of us and an impatient one behind us who kept trying to pass. Eventually the car behind us did pass on a blind corner and hit a logging truck head on. The slow car in front of us was also hit, but my dad managed to put us in the shoulder and not in the collision. This was way before mobile phones or anything like that. So I remember my dad and my older brother getting out and going over the other cars and talking with the truck driver. It was this indescribable moment of total silence and freezing cold and disbelief until the authorities came quite a bit later. I remember sitting in the back seat with my younger brothers wondering what the hell just happened. I was freshman in college and came back to my hometown for fall break. I decided to go to a football game to hang out with some old friends. On the way home, I stopped at a red light, and when it turned green, I pulled forward, as usual. From the left, a truck suddenly hit me. He was speeding and ran the red light, T-boned me right in front of my driver's door. I luckily got out with just an injured knee and fractured clavicle and some bruising. It haunted me for a while that, had I pulled forward just a little faster, or he had been just a quarter second slower, he would have gone straight into my driver's door and I likely wouldn't have made it. He wasn't even drunk or under the influence. It was just a 16-year-old kid not paying attention. My family and I were driving down the highway when we see a stopped sub in the middle of the highway with a family of 6 inside, and the car in front of us didn't get out of the way until the last second. I was working on a pipe crew in 1998. We were installing a large concrete vault in a pretty big hole. I'm standing in a ditch about 6 feet deep marking grade while the excavator operator is digging. So to the front of me is a large excavator bucket, itself weighing hundreds of pounds and backed by powerful hydraulics and thousands of pounds of steel armature, and behind me is a solid concrete wall about a foot thick. And the ditch is only a few feet wide and too tall for me to jump or climb out of with any kind of speed. Suddenly the excavator spins to one side and the arm snaps out to full extension with full force, and the operator shuts it down. The bucket missed my head by about a foot. He climbs out of the machine, visibly shaken, and tells me that something has failed on the machine and the arm wasn't supposed to have done that. So as he's been digging, he's been noticing that ever so slightly there's a bit of a delay between his inputs and the machine's actions, and in the moment before failure he just felt something wasn't right and tried to pull the bucket in when it didn't seem to want to. He turned the excavator just in case, and that's when the arm extended. Had he not, I would have been crushed to ducking death. There were 2 other excavator operators on that crew, and they were basically idiots. Had one of them been with us that day, I'm sure I'd be dead. My backpack got hit by a car while I was wearing it. Knocked me flat on my ass, but I was okay. Had a bad hangover and was kind of nervous jittery, which in turn made me extra watchful. I was driving home, Light turned green, and I started to go. Car going about 45 in crowded city traffic gives no ducks and goes right through the red. I slammed on the brakes and felt my anti-lock brakes engage for the first time in I don't know how long. Guy missed me by inches. Didn't even slow down. Had I not been hung of a ride out, I would have given the cross traffic that second look to see him barreling toward me. He likely would have T-boned me right in the driver's door. Not necessarily a second later. More like a few seconds earlier. But whatever. I worked at a private gun range for almost a decade and had one encounter where I could have nearly gotten killed. I was in what we called a trap house, a little bunker that holds a machine that throws clay targets for people to shoot. When we go into said bunker, we put a giant traffic cone on top of it that basically tells people there's someone in there. Keep your shotguns at your side unloaded and wait for them to exit. One day I was fixing some issues with the machine and was about to exit. I realized I left my bowl on the back shelf and stepped back and grabbed it. The second I did, I hear a shell go off and the cone on top of the house gets obliterated and falls in front of me. Turns out one of our members had his daughter there and was teaching her how to trap shoot. He didn't realize she loaded a shell when he was teaching her how to aim. Irrelevant cause his gun shouldn't have been pointed down range. He lost his membership over that incident. TL. Drive. If I didn't forget my bowl on a shelf, I would have stepped out of a bunker and had my head blown off by a shotgun wielded by an 8-year-old girl. Earlier this week I saw a young guy almost get killed by a tram. He wasn't listening to music or anything, but it was early in the AM and he barely caught it out of the corner of his eye. The first thing he did was a textbook Wilhelm scream, and then he noticed me looking and said, "Well, I'm ducking awake now." It passed probably 2 centimeters in front of his nose. Edit. 1 second earlier. Whatever. My dad and I were driving down the road after heavy rainfall in Vermont. He is driving, and I'm fiddling with the radio. I hear a very loud crack, and before I can ask my dad what it was, out of the corner of my eye I see movement. An entire tree was falling on the road. Due to the heavy rainfall, the dirt was too wet to keep some trees in place. My dad stood on his brake, cartoon style, and we slid nearly right into the tree. I heard a pop before we fully stopped, and when we lurched back to 0 miles per hour, we were both breathing hard. My dad got out to check the damage, and the pop I hear was a branch hitting a headlight out. First time I've ever seen my dad call 911. It was scary. Could have been the end of us if he didn't stop to chat to the waitress after we left the restaurant to go home. When I was 5 or 6, we were on holidays in Australia. My mother took me to a beach that is known because it's safe thanks to a net system that doesn't let the sharks in. Well, when we arrived the beach was empty, what was kinda strange, but we continued to have a beach day and we had a bath. My mother even swam from one point to another. After that, we were going to the car and some authorities saw us. They told us to not enter the beach because a family of alligators had entered in the water and it was really dangerous. Don't think I would have died, but to change things up from car-related incidents, I once left a lighter near a fire pit by mistake, and I was near it roasting marshmallows. I had to go inside to grab chocolate and I came back out, and just as I was walking back to the fire pit the lighter exploded. Not me, but my dad decided to stay for one more drink at a bar after work back in 1989. If he left before that last drink, he would have been on the Old Bay Bridge, very close if not under the section that collapsed during the 1989 Loma Prieta earthquake.